We are live. That's what I'm being told by producer Nick behind the scenes. Welcome back to another live stream, another episode of Signal versus Noise. Great to see the full round of hosts here. We have Brian joining us. Brian, thank you for making time to speak with us today. Liam and Michael, great to see you both as well. How is everyone doing?
Doing good. Got a crazy past couple of days. We got a big event in New York. For anybody that's going to be around, you should come out to Pub Key. But excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah, wild few days. I would err on the side of there's been a lot of signal over the past few days. If you sift through a lot of the headlines we'll talk through today, there's a lot happening right now. A lot of it has implications for Bitcoin, obviously, but really just broader. The macro landscape is shifting in real time, and I think there's a lot of different things to hit on here that we'll get into today. But good to be back with you, fellas.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and kick things off here. So, for our first topic today, we're going to be covering the op-ed from Stanley Druckenmiller. This is in the Wall Street Journal. Let the bond market speak. Rising interest rates are a signal of trouble ahead. Artificially suppressing it heightens the danger. So this was published yesterday, Monday, August 24th. It has gotten a lot of attention, and perhaps rightly so. The gist of it is that Druckenmiller has published this op-ed and essentially has been slamming Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The reason why is back of last week, August 19th, the Treasury said that it would double its 10 to 30-year buybacks from $2 billion to at least $4 billion per operation. And so essentially this op-ed piece from Druckenmiller is addressing this latest move from the Treasury and saying that this should not be happening. The bond market should be setting the yields. We should not be intervening. We, meaning the Treasury market, should not be intervening and suppressing the yields of the U.S. Treasury market. And so this is particularly interesting for a number of reasons that I think we'll get into. The first would just be, and then I'll hand it over to give the first take on signal versus noise here. But the first would be, it is interesting because Druckenmiller and Bessent have worked together in the past. They have a very tight-knit history working at Soros Fund Management. They're both very well-renowned macro traders and hedge fund managers. And so it's hard to, I think, get an exact read here, but I am curious what the group thinks because he's kind of stating the obvious, but it is putting it out there into the zeitgeist where I think typically people are not, these types of topics are not getting as much airtime and much attention as they may get on Bitcoin Twitter or in some of the alternative media outlets that we pay attention to. So I'm curious, who would like to go first, kick it off here, signal versus noise?
We need our Fed whisperer.
Well, I was gonna say I will start, and I was gonna say that this is it is similar to reading the Fed tea leaves, except you're reading sort of Treasury tea leaves and macro thinking head tea leaves in a sense. But I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, the first thing that I found sort of most funny or interesting about this is that it's very clearly written with ChatGPT. So he didn't put like a ton of necessarily effort or thought into this piece. He was like, I just gotta get some thoughts out. I'll hit up the Wall Street Journal and put an opinion piece out that is basically making a ton of salient points to your point, Jackson. Like everything he's saying here is pretty logical in terms of sort of the blunt nature of the toolkit that Bessent is now employing over the past 7 to 10 days. And he's making a lot of good points about how it's really not a solution. Like maybe you temper yields momentarily, but it's not going to actually solve the underlying problems. Now, I think where I come out on this is that it is still mostly noise in my mind because there's a few things going on here. One, he's saying that yes, like the 30-year yield is this like very important price signal in markets, which is true, but it's kind of like it's turtles all the way down in terms of like that number is derived from a lot of other manipulated statistics. Like just take CPI as an example. Like if CPI were more reflective of actual price increases, then like maybe the yields would be even higher because people would be even more worried about inflation and basically the debt situation. And so that's one angle. The other angle is like his actual prescription is completely unpalatable, and we know this. We talk about it all the time. It's like there's not going to be fiscal restraint. There's not going to be talk of cutting entitlements anytime soon. because nobody gets elected on any of those talking points. And so while he's making sense and he's making logical points, like I don't think anything that he's actually suggesting is realistic. And we'll talk more about what's going on with Bessent and sort of the broader picture, but those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help but feel this is noise. It can't not be noise, because it's either manipulated and constructed or it's just slop. And what I mean by that is, I don't know, the past 5 days, feels like a very heavy level of coordination all the way to, haven't gotten to spend a lot of time this morning on socials, but I saw the Frank Shapiro tweet about the Wall Street Journal outline about Bitcoin's time being now and 1 out of 4 Americans. That this just happened late last week, and he already like got Bloomberg to be like, let's rip something Tuesday morning and let's put it out. That like my instincts tell me this goes back to your kind of conversation with Warsh being a hawk or dove of like he has to pretend that there's some level of still kind of hemming and hawing of like we can save this thing. That's
Yeah.
what this feels like versus because he's either incompetent or like I don't think people think he's incompetent. So then he has to understand it's unsustainable, and you can't have these treasury rates rise and us not blow out like all sovereign currencies because they're all predicated on like access to that capital, selling. Like it's just a whole mess in general that he has to know this. So I think this feels more like posturing and putting some like semblance of there's still a autonomy and there's still management versus this is I believe been all pre-programmed before even Bessent and Trump getting in the office of this plan to basically reprice gold, recollateralize the markets with gold, and that's effectively what's happening here. You're on mute.
I could jump in while Liam fixes the audio, but yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of hard for me to read because, like I said, to kick things off here, they know each other. They have a relationship that goes back like 30 years. They know each other well, and so I'm not entirely sure what the 4D chess is behind putting this out into the zeitgeist at this current juncture. We know that the alternative of letting the spreads continue to blow out, so letting yields continue to rise, it is it is an option, but it's not a viable option because it does create even higher interest expense. It does also put increased pressure on the auctions of these bonds, meaning there's already a lack of demand, hence why they're intervening and introducing more significant buybacks into the market. And so I don't really know if there's no other viable option in my opinion, but I don't know exactly why this would be coming out at this exact time. I don't know if at Druckenmiller's office they have a short position on on the US Treasury market because they would want yields to go higher, and this is intervening, and that's against their interest financially. But yeah, it's tough to read because we all ultimately know where this goes long term. So I do think it is pretty noisy at this current juncture.
Do you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, nice. I agree that the general premise of this is noise and the fact that there isn't going to be anything done from a fiscal perspective, and there will continue to be interventions. We're not going to live in a free treasury market just because the chaos of how there aren't enough buyers would put too much pressure on the 10-year, which is ultimately the base for everything else on top of it. What I do think is signal here is just there will increasingly have most people who are well read and understand the markets understand that the US dollar is in such an untenable situation, and they will start to prepare accordingly. I think that, instances like the Wall Street Journal publishing this is a way for most people to understand that the US dollars world reserve currency isn't going to be here forever, and to start preparing for an eventual shift after that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes sense. I think to Michael's point, I think you're directionally right in that, Bessent knows that this isn't like the best way to go about this. I think it's one of the only remaining tools in the toolkit effectively to even try to sort of tamp this stuff down outside of like, and we'll get to this with the sanctions stuff, but like outside of like stopping the war that we're in currently, like that. It was interesting, I think, either on Friday or on Saturday, somebody was asking Trump about like what he thought about what Bessent did, and he's like, yeah, he's a smart guy, like I trust him, et cetera, et cetera. And then the reporter was like, well, what if it doesn't work? And he's like, well, we'll intervene. Like the greatest intervention is like our military. And to me, I was kind of like indirectly saying like part of the problem here is that we're at war, and so like if we take extraordinary measures, which then we saw on Monday with like economic D-Day, which we'll talk about. So I think there's a through line to all of this.
So I think that's all fair, but I talked to us before. It's just like COVID. COVID wasn't the money printing needed to happen. COVID was the excuse. In the same way, like all these things are already broken. The war is the excuse. And I would highly suggest to anybody that's curious about all this, like there's a really succinct podcast with Luke Groman on, I think it's the monetary matters aspect, which is there's carry trades happening all over the world. And if the dollar gets stronger or weaker, it blows up different parts of the carry trade. So they're just like stuck. And they go and tell you for 6 months. And this is the thing that I've been like struggling with is we've been talking about like how crazy the markets are and we feel like we're dumb, right? Week over week showing up, building the business. And then in 1 week, the narrative changes and now everyone understands the dollar's cooked. It's like nothing changed in a week except for the optics and narrative. And so that's why I think this is mainly noise is because like Druckenmiller knows that, Warsh knows that, but there is a level of optics and game that has to be played because if people just completely move away from a 60-40 bonds and equities, you have a complete destruction of the global markets. And so there's just a sequencing that needs to take place as we're going to restructure global trade and global money.
Yeah, and let's get into the next topic here because it does tie into restructuring the economic system. So this is a post here from Luke Groman. Every $4,000 increase in gold prices is an additional $1 trillion Bessent could add to the TGA, which is the Treasury General Account, to buy back U.S. Treasuries, simply by instructing Warsh to revalue U.S. official gold. Higher gold prices are now Bessent's and Warsh's friend, not their enemy, as Volcker once said. So just to explain this a little bit further for those who are not in the know, the United States has gold, allegedly, right? And it sits on their books at about $42 an ounce. And this has been the case since 1973. And so gold currently trades much higher than that, like $4,500 an ounce or so. And so based on the U.S. holding 261 million ounces or so, that's roughly 1.1 trillion of new liquidity that could enter into the economy and provide financial backstopping for the U.S. Treasury. And so I am curious what you guys make of this. I guess I can go first here and say that this is directionally signal. I do think I have heard a lot of these types of takes about gold revaluation for several years now. But to that point, like we talked about last week, we had been hearing about yield curve control for probably about 5 years, since 2021, perhaps even 2020. A lot of people expected that to play out. And now we're starting to see the early innings of yield curve control play out, in my opinion. So the signal here is that this is directionally where things go, but the noise is I don't necessarily know if this is where things go in the short term. I think someone also asked Luke, I forget where exactly, so we don't need to pull it up, but essentially like, would the Treasury be doing themselves a disservice by doing the gold revaluation now versus waiting a little bit or longer into the future for higher gold prices? And essentially, the answer would be yes, of course, because the higher the gold price goes, the more that they can re-underwrite the balance sheet of the U.S. government. So I think, again, directionally signal, but I don't necessarily know what the catalyst will be for this to actually materialize, because people have been talking about this for 5 or 10 years now.
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is way above my pay grade, but there's a lot of objectively when it's broken down how this is the way from a global perspective we get out of this pickle of the dominance of the dollar and the reserve asset. We've already seen the reserve asset move from treasuries to gold, and it works out in everyone's benefit if you have a neutral currency as it relates to manufacturing, as it relates to net settlement of oil. And I think like part of that podcast I was referencing, and it's not to say everything is exactly right, but it's the sequence of getting gold higher. And then once you do that, naturally gold goes higher, recapitalizes different, effectively recapitalizing the treasury market. And so in that world, it's very inflationary, but it's the only way out of this whole mess. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, like I think that the real question here is the timing and how far they're going to let gold rip in the conversations or the like narrative that shifts. Because I think that's the thing to pay attention to. There's a real good acknowledgement that gold is the treasury reserve asset and it behaves like it. Meaning, when the price went up to 5,400 and then dipped down to 4,000, that's what it does. And it made me think that's what a treasury reserve asset would do. You don't need any permission. You sell it, you fill any liquidity gaps in your local sovereign or whatever your liabilities are. And it made me think of Bitcoin because that's what Bitcoin's been for the past 17 years. It's that first thing people sell because it's the thing you don't need permission. You can always access to it. And so I think it makes complete sense that we've talked about it on the like commodity side that if sovereigns need to preserve their wealth and then they naturally need the one thing that everyone's in need of and it's going to continue to rise with, whether it's AI or just inflation, commodity oil, that you're going to want to hold an asset that appreciates with that oil price to offset the cost of it. And because why would you be holding dollars that are going to be, demonetized? You're going to lower the value of them. So it just makes sense that this is like multiple steps, and we've seen sovereigns get rid of treasuries, we've seen gold price appreciate, and this last step, which is kind of goes back to I've always wondered why the hell did they never revalue the $42 an ounce, and like it just makes me think of like what if this was always understood that at a certain point you may need to use this wild card, which is effectively price the gold, which is insanely inflationary if you think about it, because you're effectively taking all this gold and saying now it's this, and now I have this in my account, and I can go buy back this amount, which it's just an accounting trick.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that this is noise because of where really the gold sits. And just the fact that China has so much more gold than the US today, the Treasury coming out and saying we're going to revalue our gold in order to use it as collateral in order to buy treasuries would mean that they would have to shift positioning significantly ahead of that, both to acquire more gold, because obviously when the Treasury comes out and says that, gold's going to run, as well as ensure that, maybe their counterparties, whether it's a kinetic war and they don't necessarily have the gold in their own borders, or something else where they may be caught off guard with a recent revaluation of gold. And so I think that for a lot of reasons, gold is going to be one part of the toolkit, but it can't be the entire thing just because of the amount of gold that's held overseas, and why I think that something like the American like Modernization Treasury Reserve Act will end up happening, because there need to be other assets in there like Bitcoin, which the US has a lot more of, the citizens own more of, as well as other precious materials that like we have in better supply than other countries out there too.
Yeah, but didn't 6 months ago we brought all the gold home?
We did, but I just don't. I mean, I'm not necessarily a gold expert, but it seems like other countries still have a lot more than us, at least through their people too.
But that's the other side of this trade. We're not the dominant currency or marginal price setter. Everyone just has the neutral reserve currency.
Also, just like practically in terms of the order of operations, like I don't know if gold runs when
Can you mute Liam?
Like, I don't know if gold runs when, if and when they announce they're revaluing the gold. I would actually think it does the opposite if then the intuition is that they're going to be selling gold to buy treasuries. I think the play now is you get gold to run now before you make that decision. So however long that period is where you are, doing buybacks with other form or means of cash and, sort of allowing the dollar to weaken and allowing gold to run. Like, I don't know how long that process takes out, but I think once you actually come out and say, we're like doing this, we're going to use some of those proceeds to buy treasuries. Like, to me, that would send the gold price down, would it not? Am I thinking about that incorrectly?
Logically, it would, but I haven't even fully understand, like when you reprice the gold and the TGA, like, are you actually selling, or is it just giving your funny money the ability to go and buy those, but do you still retain? Like, I don't fully understand the
It's
mechanism
essentially
on
a
the
mark
back
to
end.
market. You're just marking to market the value of the gold on the balance sheet.
Understood, but
Right.
what we're asking is, do you sell the gold to buy the treasuries, or just do you get that in your account?
Is it just assume we're good now?
I'm pretty sure it's just an account. It's just an
accounting.
accounting trick, is my understanding. So you revalue it now. All of a sudden, you have this additional liquidity that you can use to intervene.
Yeah. So to Brian's point, they're not selling it though.
Correct. Yes. All right, let's move on. So U.S.-Iran sanctions targeted at China. Here's the headline. China needs U.S. dollars, but it is building a hedge against Washington sanctions. So the key points here from CNBC. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has warned Chinese banks that they will be sanctioned if they facilitate transactions and are a part of the ecosystem that turns Iranian oil into money. Before the war, China bought around 90% of Iran's exported oil, about 12% of China's total crude imports per a March analysis. Analysts say that China still has a strong incentive to remain connected to dollar finance, but the country has alternatives. Economic D-Day. Brian, you said it. Do you want to lead us off here? What do you think? Is this signal or is it noise? Is it just more of the same? Or is this actually signal? Is this actually an escalation worth paying attention to?
I don't think so. I mean, first of all, they didn't actually enact anything on D-Day, which is kind of an interesting twist. Like, if you think about the historical connotations of D-Day, like, it was a surprise attack where obviously whatever they were doing was enforced in the moment. This was like forecasted on Sunday night, like, hey, Bessent's going to do a 2 p.m. presser. And then he comes out and says it's economic D-Day, but hasn't actually implemented any of these, what are called like secondary sanctions. So basically think about it like, Iran is obviously sanctioned, but it's sanctioning anyone who could possibly touch them on like a second or third order effect, and allow them to access financing effectively. But I don't think, to my knowledge, like it hasn't been implemented. So there's now this like waiting period of like, well, are you going to negotiate, deal with us? Like, we've seen 6 months of like, they don't seem willing to negotiate on any of this stuff. So I would say it's more noise, it's more posturing, is my base take. And to Michael, your point earlier, like, I agree with you. Like, I think a lot of the war stuff is effectively a convenient excuse to allow a lot of this stuff to be put in motion. And I don't necessarily know where it goes from here, because it's like, okay, well, you do these secondary sanctions, and then what's after that? Like, if that doesn't work, then what's next? Do we just nuke them off the face of the planet? Like, that seems like, a potential end state, but I don't think we get there. And so I don't know what the in-between steps are.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this a lot. I need to flesh this out better, but like, hey, this is the perfect time for this show, Signal versus Noise, because there's just so much when I think about CNBC, specifically on the TV. It's like, what are they saying? And then what are they really saying? And you see this in shows. I know it sounds funny, but like the way that China and Iran are like the bad man the past 2 years in all these different shows, it's like there's so much propaganda baked into this that right, it goes back to the notion of since the 70s or whatever, they've been trying to enrich uranium, or they're 2 weeks away or 2 years away. But I think at the net state, this goes back to the things we've been talking about. We're going to a multipolar world. I think that there is realization that we have to wean ourselves off from cheap labor if we're going to reindustrialize across sectors. And that's part of the tariff aspect if you need to incentivize things to be made here. I think that there's a notion of the Iran war ties back to reshaping geopolitical lines around oil and money movement. There's a reality that part of where this all ends is potentially Iran's oil coming onto the market. There's a notion of, well, the sanctions tie into this like multipolar aspect of where capital can move. I do think that there was something interesting that ties into this that Liam had said about why would they do the Bitcoin? I think it's both, right? Because if gold's going to reprice, well, Bitcoin naturally is also, for a number of reasons with optics and just demand. And if the US is holding that, so you have like the real wild card is like gold reprices. Let's say we are 50% to 100%. I would imagine we have 50 to 100% of what China does, because China's a black box. The point being is we pretty much have 2 to 3x in the same way in BTC, that you can just see how like they're painting this picture of like this sanctions and also who's working with them. And I think that there's a heavy part here around censorship and effectively cutting off choke points of where people are going to be leveraging, right? If you think about, there's these opaque exchanges, banking, shadow, where, what is it, they can't hold an insane amount of treasuries. This is almost like painting that picture of we're going to get a lot more constrained with how money can move in this future world. And I think that's a component of a lot of those.
Yeah, I think that's all well said. I think that
we can't hear Liam again. Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with a lot of what you guys said, and I think the real signal here is that this is just a acceleration of the trend that's already playing out. So, yes, obviously that the United States can put financial pressure on its adversaries in the short term, but as we saw play out over the past several years and decades, and particularly the one notable event that people like to cite would be 2022 with Russia FX sanctions. I mean, this is directionally where it all goes, right? Michael, to your point, we're already kind of converging, or we, meaning sovereigns, are already converging around neutral reserve assets to reprice commodities in, to circumvent different restrictions, particularly in the US dollar system. So, yeah, I mean, there could be pressures put on, and who knows how this will actually play out. Brian, to your point, we haven't seen any definitive action yet. It's really just a threat at the moment, but it is just going to accelerate the trend that ends up being favorable for gold and Bitcoin over the long term.
Yeah, I completely agreed. Can you guys hear me now? Nice. All right. So I do think that this is signal in the instance of they're essentially sending a signal to find other ways to complete trade, because that's really what is going on right now. The oil market is pretty much completely priced in dollars, and if China wants to trade and buy oil from other countries, they need some amount of dollars on hand. They're going to make it more and more difficult in order to allow Chinese banks, or at least position as they're going to make it more difficult for them to access SWIFT. And so with that, I think that, we're going to see instances like this, like Jackson, you talked about with Russia and the seizing of their treasuries over the next few years, just because it's going to increasingly show that the US doesn't necessarily want people just pricing everything in US dollars, because that means our currency continues to get weaker and it's tougher to bring manufacturing back onshore at a time when it's strategically important for the country as a whole.
All right, so let's round out the last topic of today's live stream here. So we're going to be talking about AI. Apple is winning the AI race without models. Well, that is what the topic says. That is up for debate here. So you can see this post on X. Apple just dropped the new Mac Studio M5 Ultra with 256 gigabytes unified memory for nearly $10,000. You could run DeepSeek V4 Flash locally on this machine. No API limits, no rate limits, no subscriptions. Just your own inference sitting on your desk. With the compute shortage getting worse and every lab adding new limits every week, owning your own inference is starting to look like the smartest investment in AI. So the thing that we could discuss here would be, is Apple winning the AI race? I mean, they're one of the only large tech companies in this conversation that consistently stays ahead of the curve, but really not in the ways these other companies are, right? The other companies have produced frontier models. Apple Intelligence has failed, and so they're providing the hardware, they're providing the solution so that you can actually interface with these technologies locally. And so I'm curious what you guys think. Is this signal? Is this noise? Is this Apple being strategic? Is this them trying to stay relevant and react? What's the read here?
I'm happy to jump in. I think that this is signal in the fact that they haven't necessarily had to be wed to a single winner, and as the category grows stronger as a whole, they can benefit from people who want to host models locally. I think what this really means from a larger perspective is this will be a lot of prosumers who want to spend a lot of money or a little bit more technological forward. And it does two great things. One, it puts pressure on the large model labs to act in almost good faith, because there are credible alternatives that people can now run locally, both with the models that are where they are today, and people can easily download them and just have the AI download it for them, as well as it does put pressure on the build out and the amount of capacity that we're putting towards data centers here in the US. And so with that, I think that Apple is in a strong position, just almost like the open router, as AI has become more and more smaller and can be easily run locally, and they don't necessarily have to pick a winner. So I think that what they've done is actually pretty nice, and not capital expensive heavy like some of those other providers.
Yeah, I would say this is mostly noise. Like, I think I don't necessarily know if it's intentional or it's the version of better being lucky than right in Apple having the hardware in the consumer. Maybe this is like long term, just thinking in general, independent of AI, um, that they would be in a spot to create an experience for users as technology waves grow. But one thing, a lot of people get lost on like, well, why, when you think of FANGs and you think of Apple and Netflix and Amazon and Microsoft and Google, Apple is like a deterministic company, not a non-deterministic company. Meaning, like, if you think about, they never had a recall on a phone, and there's a reason why, and it's because they get down to the detail of everything that they do. Where when you're running an AI lab in all the different ways, it's like non-deterministic inherently by it, but it's like you don't necessarily have it's a completely different model. So what they do in the AI world, I think the reason why they're not at a frontier lab or building like what Meta is trying to do is that's just not their business. And the other thing is that I just fundamentally think that the value in AI and where individuals, yes, prosumers may do some of this stuff, but the reality is like there's the harness, there's the memory, there's the experience. And if you're downloading the model, it's like, or if you're downloading the model, you still have to set up all of these things that naturally people won't do. I think of it very much like custody versus like something like multi-institution. It's like how many people at scale are going to do that versus the people that are going to go and leverage the harness that is already built, can push updates, et cetera, et cetera. So I think like this is interesting, but I don't necessarily know at the scale also that it provides. I think open source models provide a check and balance on the frontier labs, but they're not running on this thing. They're running on NVIDIA and other GPUs sitting in, rack space and warehouses to keep them in check, not the person running like on a local Apple device.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, I agree more so with you, Michael. I think like this is to me, at least in the near to medium term, like a uh, power user or even like arguably a niche thing that someone's going to spend 10K on this, build it all themselves, as opposed to like, producer Nick, if you could scroll down to like the first comment on this post, um, somebody replied, yeah, bro, local DeepSeek is better than 47 months of Fable 5 on Max. It's like that's a big upfront cost, 4 years of paying Max for Fable 5 versus like you do it yourself and you pay that all up front.
And I did it, like, just so you know, like, I have a badass MacBook and I have these local models and I don't use them. Like, I'm just like, why
Right.
would I? Like, I have to set up so much shit. It's like, I just have everything, like, using. And I'm not saying that's forever, but it's just more of generalizing, like, most people. Sorry, but it's just, yeah.
Yeah. No, that was my first point. And then the second one is like I do think, it is you're right that it's not Apple's business to get into the LLM game. And so I think whether they meant to do this or they kind of just like fell into it naturally, I do think it makes sense for them as a business to be like a little bit more agnostic, focus on consumer grade hardware, and not have to play this super competitive game of like trying to build a frontier model themselves. Like, it's obviously pretty saturated and getting more saturated, and so I do think it's logical for them. But yeah, like I said, like I do think at least for in the near term, it remains kind of a niche thing for someone to do this.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of signal and noise. I think on the signal side, Apple is leading the consumer products to be able to do this, but I do think on the noise side, don't need to reiterate all your points there, but that's kind of where my head was going, Michael, before you started to vocalize your opinion on it, was that this is really a niche thing. Like if we got out of X for a little bit and asked people their opinions on a topic like this, they would have no idea what we're talking about, right? Just the same way if we were asking people about Bitcoin or how do you custody your Bitcoin? Well, most people don't even own Bitcoin to begin with, right? So I think this does provide a lot of value to those who are power users or those who are on the frontier of using these technologies. But at the end of the day, I don't know if people actually get there. They just want things that are packaged up nicely. They want things that work when they use them, and they don't want to be spending a part-time job trying to run stuff locally. So we'll continue to see what happens here, but I think this is largely noise in the grand scheme of things. All right, so I know we are coming up on time here. We have a lightning round. I'm curious who would like to go first there. Anything that caught your attention in the past few days since we recorded on Thursday?
Yeah, I'll go. I think for as much shit as he gets, it was pretty genuine. The Sam Altman and David Sedgwick pod, I haven't fully listened to it, but he said one thing on that podcast, which was basically we romanticize, Bitcoin or AI and like how will it proliferate and grow, and we come up with all these reasons why people won't adopt Bitcoin. And I think it actually just comes down to human nature across any change. And the anecdote he used very loosely and innocently was like, never fathomed growing up why people would go to Blockbuster when he had Netflix at home. And it sounds innocent, but I just think about like that's just how societies work and individuals work. It's like change happens and then it takes time to diffuse. And so all of these things we talk about, some will happen faster than others, but you still need the rest of the market. And I think we talked about this a few months ago about like humans are the bottleneck with AI, but not the way that people think. And Bitcoin.
Yeah, I can go. Producer Nick, if you want to pull up what I shared. Michael, you mentioned this earlier in the show, but the Wall Street Journal Bitcoin ad, this was actually put out by the Nakamoto Institute, I believe they're called, or the Nakamoto Project. Sorry, the Nakamoto Project. And if you also click to their landing page, it says, it's time to take Bitcoin seriously. Bitcoin has moved from the margins to the mainstream. Institutions hold it. Regulators have cleared its path. But many investors still don't quite get it. That's why we're here. We're not going to explain the technical details, but we'll help you see what makes Bitcoin valuable in our world today. And I just thought this was interesting from a few components. One, I've always thought about like print media ads. And like, obviously in this instance, like it's pretty much impossible to assess like the ROI on, like if you were trying to calculate like how many net new people buy Bitcoin because they saw this ad in the Wall Street Journal, like, we'll never really know. And those full page print ads are very expensive, so it's hard to sort of handicap that. But I do think that this is like a great landing page, like to send to a friend or family that wants to get a little taste of like why maybe they should be interested in Bitcoin, learn more about it. It's very sort of straightforward, simple, elegant looking, and just tells a very high level story of Bitcoin has sort of matured over the past few years. It's not going away is part of the take here, and gets into some of the fundamentals around it. So I thought this was pretty cool.
Bitcoin's going mainstream. A lot of people don't necessarily like that, but it's happening. Mine, I'll go real quick. It's just about actually the App Store too. It's another Mac related one, and how U.S. consumer spending on Apple's App Store fell for the first time in a decade in Q2, down, it looks like about 5% after double-digit growth for pretty much all of the last decade. I think this is a lot of what we've talked about before about things being easy to make and thus being overwhelmed with slop out there and being very difficult to discern the signal from the noise. And that's why we bring this show to you every week too, to try to make it easier to discern what's real and what's noise out there.
Nice. Yeah, on my side, just to round things out here, my signal of the week would just be stay vigilant. I have seen a number of incidents going around in the Bitcoin space, which is where most of our audience sits today. And so the latest was a social engineering attack of a younger individual who is technically savvy, lost all their Bitcoin through a social engineering attack. And the thing is here that I just want people to be mindful of, and it's maybe something to say to myself as well, is just making sure that everything is locked down. This was these attackers were able to get access through phone calls, and then kind of rushing urgency built into getting access to a Gmail account, where then a lot of information was able to be extracted, including IDs, passports, etc., to then get access. And so I just call this out because at the end of the day, look, these are things that we've been talking about the Bitcoin price the past few days here. It's been a very bullish week. Price is up about 25% in just about 1 week. And so we have to just operate under the assumption that things are going to get very crazy from here. So if anything, just pay attention. The signal is make sure your things are locked down. If you're going to be managing things yourself in regards to self-custody, just make sure you're very vigilant here.
I thought you were going to tell people the signal is in New York tomorrow night at PubKey.
Well, we didn't get to our finishing remarks here, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we actually will be hosting a happy hour at PubKey. If you've been listening to this show, if you've followed On Ramp Media, if you listen to any of the podcasts, if The Last Trade is your favorite podcast, then we'd love to host you 5:30 to 7:30. Perhaps we'll end up staying a bit later at PubKey tomorrow, Wednesday, August 26th. We have included links to RSVP for that, as well as the virtual roundtable that will be taking place at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll be discussing where we go from here as an industry in light of the recent news within the Bitcoin custody space, and also just discussing some of the latest on the macro side from your favorite quant here, Brian Cubellis, among an update from Early Riders and where the team at Early Riders is investing into the various capital stack, the various areas of the market, infrastructure, payments, stable coins, Bitcoin, etc. Did I miss anything there, Michael?
I think you did it. And we're still waiting to see if anybody's going to bring you ground beef to PubKey. It looks like somebody on Twitter sent you
now I don't know if I
pound.
want it because I'm sure you've been reading about the ground beef.
Yeah.
No way, no.
We gotta be
Yeah,
careful
yeah,
with
yeah.
ground beef. What's going on there?
Man, it's too much just for another lightning round here, but just a lot of beef is being imported from outside of the country, with things that you may not want to eat in it is the short of it. So shake a rancher's hand, as some might say, right? I mean, if you're not going to run local models on your computer, you should be running local beef in your refrigerator. How about that?
Very well said.
It's kind of a very precarious time when you can't trust the food you're eating.
You always used to say that, Michael. It's like, yeah, you just trust the food. It's like, well, now we do that anymore.
Now we have to test our ground beef before we cook it.
Yeah.
You got to run your own. Yeah, you got to run your own cattle.
All right.
Thanks, boys.
Good stuff, guys.
Later.
See ya.